I'm Paul Bloom. I'm a professor of psychology at University of Toronto and an emeritus professor at Yale University. And I study human nature. I study children, I study development. I'm particularly interested in morality, in the social emotions, in how we understand ourselves and how we relate to other people.
Why are we compelled to behave badly?
So I'm really interested in perverse actions. And what I mean by perverse actions are when we do the wrong thing, wrong from a moral point of view, wrong for a rational point of view, just for the sake of doing the wrong thing. Why we rebel against the forces of morality and rationality. I find this a fascinating question. It's a question which has occupied psychologists and philosophers and theologians for a very long time. And it seems like a genuine puzzle. Natural selection, human development, our needs as social creatures and physical creatures, it should all drive us to behave reasonably, rationally. So it's a really interesting puzzle for me. Why sometimes we don't. Not because we're making a mistake. We slip up all the time, but because we choose not to. So whenever I talk about perversity, inevitably people ask me, what kind of perverse things do you do? How do you break the rules? How do you, what kind of these gross immoral actions you've done? The truth is, I'm a fairly boring person. You're not talking to Hunter Thompson here. On the other hand, I engage in what a friend of mine, Talia Wheatley, described as micro-perversity, which is these little ways in which I do things kind of unexpected. Maybe we're sitting across dinner and all of a sudden I grab one of your French fries. Dude, what's up with that? Just felt like it. I was on a podcast and somebody asked me my opinion of a very famous figure in my field. And I said, yeah, he's a drunk. And the person was shocked. Just edit that out. But so I push it in little ways. But in big ways, I'm not a very perverse person. There's a sense in which psychologists say research is me-search and people study the way they are. For me, I've often studied what I'm not. I study religion, even though I'm not religious. And I think my interest in perversity often is that I'm not that perverse. And so that makes me even more interested in the perversity of others. My work on psychology is very informed by evolutionary theory. And I'm always the sort to ask, how did this evolve? And I think about this in my research on social interaction, on morality, on rationality, always looking for an evolutionary account for how we've come to be. I don't think in the case of perversity there is such an evolutionary account. I don't think, for instance, other animals, other primates, engage in perverse actions in the sense I'm interested in. They do good things, they do bad things, sometimes they make mistakes, but they aren't purposefully perverse. Being purposely perverse is something that's uniquely human. Doesn't mean it's magic. It doesn't mean it violates evolutionary theory. I think the best way to think about it is that we've evolved through natural selection an extraordinarily rich set of cognitive capacities, a sort of social intelligence, the ability to imagine the future, moral motivations. Perverse actions are something we've thought up. Once given this sort of suite of capacities, all of a sudden it occurs to some of us, many of us, maybe all of us, hey, I can be perverse. And so it wasn't shaped directly by evolution, but it's more of a sort of individual discovery that we all make. One of the forces behind perversity that I find particularly interesting is what I call hopeful monster theory. And hopeful monster is a phrase used to explain an evolutionary theory by this guy a long time ago named Goldschmidt. And Goldschmidt understood that the logic of natural selection is you have these animals and they reproduce and you get this very, very slight variation. And then the variants that do better give rise to more offspring. The ones that do worse die out. And through this slow, gradual accretion, you end up with different species and different organs and different capacities. That's the Darwinian story of natural selection. But Goldschmidt said there's something else. Sometimes, he argued, there are extreme mutations. And these extreme mutations lead to radical changes in creatures. And most of the time, they're unsuccessful. They lead to death. but some small proportion of the time, they pay off. They lead to an entirely different way of doing things that's superior. And in that way, he argued, we get certain cases where there's speciation, different species evolve. Now, I'm not arguing that this is true for evolution. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I understand many of them look very poorly on this theory. But I do think it's true for everyday life. I think sometimes if your life is going well, you will keep on doing what you do, and maybe you'll try out different things. You'll try this restaurant instead of that restaurant. Maybe you'll go to work 10 minutes earlier. Just minor modifications. You behave towards your kid, towards your spouse in subtly different ways. That's normal life when it's going well. But what if it's not going well? What if everything you try fails? What if it's all a disaster? Well, maybe what you should do is, on analogy of hopeful monster theory, take a jump. Do something totally different. Don't go to work one day. Leave your job. Start a new relationship. Do something totally different. If you ain't got nothing, you ain't got nothing to lose. If things are going badly, these jumps, the payoff that these jumps could give you, these very perverse acts can give you, outweighs the costs of their failure. And I think this is a form of perversity that shows up sometimes in extreme circumstances, but it shows up in some individual lives. So what do I mean when I'm talking about perversity? Well, my favorite example, and a favorite example by anybody who thinks about this, is that of St. Augustine. So St. Augustine wrote the Confessions a long time ago, and in it he begins a chapter by saying, I'm going to confess my perverse and evil actions. And you think he's going to talk about sex, because he's kind of leading up a lot of sexual insinuation. Doesn't talk about sex at all. His example, to the disappointment of many people through history, is very, very mild. He and his friend go into an orchard, and they steal some pears. That's it. That's the extent of the crime. But Augustine was fascinated by this because he didn't know why he did it. He said, I wasn't hungry, and in fact, I threw the pears to some pigs. Didn't want them. I did it because I wanted to be bad. This was puzzling for Augustine because, unlike other bad behaviors, including his sexual transgressions, there was no motivation for it. His sexual transgressions were meant to satisfy a desire he had. But where does the desire to be bad come from? Why would he want to be bad? This sort of historical example led me to be interested in perverse actions. And I then wanted to collect everyday examples. I had a lot of examples from books and from movies and everything. I wanted to collect everyday examples. So I started what I called the Perversity Project, where I went online in multiple sources and asked people to contribute stories from their own lives where they acted perversely. And perversely was defined as cases where they did the wrong thing because it was wrong. And I got some amazing stories. The first story I got was from this young woman who flirted with her girlfriend's boyfriend, just to get him interested in her, get her girlfriend very upset. And she said, I don't know, I just did it to be wrong. I just did it because it would just mess things up in some way that was satisfying to me. But the story I like the most is some guy, he goes on and he says, like, I'm walking with my friend and we get some ice cream. And I thought to myself, man, it'd be messed up if I stuck my finger in his ice cream. So I did it. I went, and stuck my finger in his ice cream. And he said, dude, what are you doing? I don't know. I just wanted to do something messed up. And now I have hundreds of examples like that. Some are cruel. Some are involving real cruel things people do to each other. Some are silly. Some are really mild. Somebody wrote a little thing saying, sometimes even there's a sign saying, don't walk on the grass. I stick my foot in there just to do it a little bit. Very mild and sweet. I think once you introduce the term perversity, you introduce the idea to people, everyone has their own examples. So the perverse acts I'm interested in and I study are ones that are deliberate and conscious, and they're not mistakes. But there's a near neighbor to them, which is actually very interesting. And it's perverse actions that are born out of intrusive thoughts. So we all have intrusive, inappropriate thoughts. I'm standing on a high balcony and have the urge to jump. I'm on the subway and there's somebody next to me and I have the urge to push. I never would. But there's this intrusive urge. And for some of us, in cases of psychological problems, the urge can become overwhelming and requires treatment. But most of us don't have it that badly. We have this intrusive urge. But sometimes there's a bit of a glitch in the system. And it leads us to behave in ways that are similar to perverse actions. So for instance, people who are very, very worried about appearing prejudiced will sometimes blurt out and be more likely to blurt out prejudiced remarks because they're constantly monitoring and thinking, and it's more on their mind. There's some studies finding that if you're told, don't reveal the location of something, told to keep a secret, you become, more than somebody else, more likely to reveal a location because you have this voice in your head saying, don't tell him, don't tell him, don't tell him. And that's a very loud voice, and things could slip out. I don't think they're true expressions of, say, an autonomous urge, but they are perverse in the sense that you end up doing exactly what you don't want to do. Psychologists have tried to explore perversion in different directions, and one, I think, interesting attempt at this was done by Michael Bang Peterson and his colleagues, and they developed what they call the need for chaos scale. And the need for chaos scale explores a sort of particular form of perverse action, the desire to destroy everything that's good. You have to say how much you agree to statements like, sometimes I just like to destroy beautiful things, or I think society should be burned to the ground, or sometimes I see something beautiful and I wish it would go away. And it turns out people vary widely. Some people say, no, 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 that's crazy. And other people say yes. They find in this scale, and maybe this won't be surprising to you, that young people tend to go higher for need for chaos than old people. Men are higher than women. And that people on the political extremes tend to be higher than people in the center. They had expected that people on the right, extremely right wing, would show more of a need for chaos than the left wing. And while other people expected it should be more on the left and the right. But it turns out it's kind of balanced. It's just political extremes tend to encourage a sort of need for chaos. To put it another way, I think, maybe a better way, is if you have a very high need for chaos, you really want to mess the world up. You'll be drawn to views on the political extreme, either to the right or to the left. There are many explanations for perverse behavior. I think this diversity of explanations is one reason why it's such an interesting topic. It reflects all sorts of different human motivations. But for my money, the most interesting motivation for perversity is a desire for autonomy, a desire to be an agent in the world, to exert one's will. If I just do the rational thing, if I just do the moral thing, what good am I? Why am I needed? I could be replaced by an algorithm. And I think this weighs on us. This weighs on us as we do, as we should, the reasonable thing, the moral thing, over and over and over again. We want to show ourselves to be human. We want to push against it. I think this explains why perverse behavior shows up, in particular at certain points of life. Toddlers are notoriously perverse creatures. They want to exert their will. They want to exert their will sometimes in silly ways, by demanding something that they can't get, by picking a fight over something that's ridiculous, just filled with rage, but in a profoundly irrational way. But it's a human desire, and it shows up early. Adolescence, a period of great transition and a great uncertainty of where you fit into society, is a time for perverse actions. And there's a so-called midlife crisis at a certain point in age. A lot of men, a lot of women are wondering, is this what it is? Is this what I'm stuck with? Is this the way my life is going? And so it grates on them, and they push. And, they push. They may get a tattoo. They may get a sports car they can't afford. They may do something crazy. They may end one relationship and begin another. And I think that these times of life in which perversity is most reveals the power of autonomy as one explanation for it. There's also some psychological research And the psychological research comes under the rubric of what's called reactance theory. An idea of reactance theory is sometimes people will do things just because they are told not to do those things. And I think this expresses the urge to be autonomous. If I was going to walk out that door when I leave, there's many doors I choose to walk out that door, and I'm headed to that door, and then somebody tells me, you better walk out that door. I might choose to walk out a different door. Maybe that was the door I wanted to, but nobody tells me what to do. I want to make my own decisions. I want to be a person. I want to be autonomous. And so there's various studies finding that interventions often have paradoxical effects. During COVID, there was some evidence that for some people, being told they had to get a vaccine shot made them less likely to get a vaccine shot. Studies of binge drinking in colleges find that some people, if they're told very strongly and in a very authoritarian way, you are not to drink too much, will then go out and drink too much. Same thing for drug use and for smoking. Often we respond to demands upon ourselves. And you don't have to hear the psychological studies to know this. We feel it in everyday life. Often we respond to demands upon ourselves by doing the opposite. And it's because we want to be in charge of ourselves. And this is one of the forces, I think, behind perverse behavior. You have to distinguish the autonomy explanation from a signaling explanation. I think signaling explanations for perversity are interesting, but this is different. When we break the rules, it's not to impress other people. It's not to say, wow, what a rule breaker, how interesting. It's to show something to ourselves. A perverse agent might break the rules in ways that are private, that only he or she knows about. The concern about autonomy is not a concern about looking autonomous. It's a concern about being autonomous. And, I'm not the first to point this out. This is an observation by Dostoevsky, by Sartre, about how even in the most private of ways, we want to show ourselves to be free. Another explanation for perverse acts is to impress other people. I mean, if I behave rationally and morally, you might see me as a square. Wouldn't want that. I might want to be vivacious, exciting, unpredictable, sexy in a way. And I think it's maybe no surprise for why the jump in perverse behavior by adolescents may be in part an asserting of autonomy, but it may also be in large part because this is a time where people are struggling to find partners, to impress, to rise up the social hierarchy. And in the right sort of community, a reputation for being a bit unpredictable, a bit dangerous, really does do the trick. People who study social behavior and game theory and that kind of thing have pointed out that there's cases where sort of strategic irrationality, a little bit of craziness, can actually give you an advantage over somebody else. And sometimes this craziness manifests itself as perversity. A rational person is an extremely predictable person. And someone who has a bit of perversity through their lives, it makes them unpredictable in certain ways. A perfectly rational poker player is a poker player who's fairly easy to beat, which is why the best poker players always throw some randomness into their behavior. And, often life is poker writ large. Another way in which perversity could be powerful is regarding threats. So suppose I'm a perfectly rational agent, and you and I are in some sort of deal, and I say, if you do this, I'm going to do this back at you. But I'm rational. So if I make an extreme threat, and a threat that would throw myself at risk, that would cause too much damage, you could dismiss it. Bloom is rational. He would never do something extreme. But suppose you knew I was a perverse agent and often did the wrong thing just for the sake of doing the wrong thing. Now you have to worry about my unrealistic threats. It's what Richard Nixon called the madman theory of politics, which is if you give your adversary the impression that you're a little bit nuts, it gives you an edge in certain ways. And I think some perverse behavior could be explained in that way. There are some fields of human endeavor where perversity is really prized, and probably no more than the art world. The great artists are often known and appreciated and admired for acts that seem perverse and unpredictable. It's said that, modern art began when there was an art competition in New York City, and they said they would accept any artwork. So Marcel Duchamp sent in a urinal, and they sent it back. They said, no, we just want artwork. And Duchamp said, it is artwork. And the urinal, called Fountain, became one of the most prized artwork of our time. When we think about great artistic innovations and often great scientific discoveries, there's often a sense of the audacious. Another example is from Banksy. So Banksy had this artwork, Girl with a Balloon, I think it was called, on auction from Sotheby's. And so they're going around and they're doing the gavels and everything, and people are bidding. And when the final bid comes in, a machine that was hidden inside the frame starts to operate, and the painting goes down and is shredded in front of a horrified people, and it shreds about half of it. This artwork, which has been destroyed, is of course now far more valuable than it was purchased for, because of Banksy's willful act of destruction. I mean, to be honest, sometimes it's not so much perversity as it is calculation. I'm not sure. Banksy described himself as an act of creative destruction and everything, but Banksy might have also thought, boy, this is going to get me a lot of attention, a lot of money. In which case, does it count as perversity, or does it count as sort of the enactment of perversity? I'm not sure. Perverse actions are individual acts, but they're in the context of a culture. And this shows up in a couple of ways. One way is your culture determines how much perversity is encouraged, how much it's nurtured and encouraged, or how much it's staunched. There are many societies where children are encouraged to go a bit crazy, to be creative, to break the rules. And an imaginative way of breaking the rules is often looked at kind of fondly, respect, causes some laughter. There's other more authoritarian cultures where children are expected not to do so, where attempts to break the rules are severely punished. Within a sort of adult community, there have been times and situations in the art world, say, where conformity is encouraged, where skill and virtuosity are encouraged. Other times, maybe the skill matters less and the imaginative jumps matter more, the creativity, the audaciousness. So you get this influence of culture. And then, of course, the perverse acts of people shape the culture. To some extent, you could look at the music we listen to now, the movies we watch, the books we read, the art we appreciate, and we see in it the reflections of the individual decisions, most of them rational, most of them normal, but some small percentage of them perverse on the world we have now. So culture influences the extent of perversity, and perversity goes back and influences culture. It wouldn't be crazy to look down on perversity. It makes sense that people should do the right thing, right from a moral point of view, right from a rational point of view. And I think 99.9% of the time, this is the best way to live a life. A lot of perverse actions also cause harm. They cause suffering. I think there's a lot of evil that's not perverse. A lot of evil is done just for sort of functional reasons, and people want to satisfy goals. You want to rob a bank because that's where the money is. You want to kill somebody because you hate them. Not cruel, but not perverse. But some evil acts are perverse. There are perverse agents who live among us, and they cause nothing but trouble. It's like Alfred, Batman's butler, how he described a Joker, which is that some people just want to watch the world burn. And there's nothing good to that. But I'm a fan of perversity, at least in the right places and the right dosages. I think perversity is a force that makes the world more interesting. It pushes the boundary of creative products, of art, of music, of literature. I think it plays a role even in science, where I think sometimes scientists act perversely, and sometimes, not always, not usually, but sometimes it pays off in wonderful ways. I also think on an everyday basis, it makes life more interesting. I want my friends to be moral and rational most of the time. But I think it's a little bit of a more interesting world where occasionally, I steal my friend's French fry and he sticks his finger into my ice cream. And there's a little bit of chaos inserted that make life a little bit more fun.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.